APIs. So like what APIs are, how to use APIs, and provide really interesting examples of APIs. We have our representative here today, Phil, from Twilio, who'll be leading this workshop and teaching you guys. Throughout the workshop, if you have any questions, please feel free to post in the chat, and Phil will do his best to answer them. Or if not, I can always direct it towards him if he needs. So yeah, so handing it over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Rebecca. And hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen because I've got some slides to start with, and then we'll get onto some demos and things later. And also, I'm going to then have to rearrange Zoom because it hides all the things when you try and share a screen. So I'm just going to bring those bits back up. There we go. I can see the chat. So yeah, as Rebecca said, yeah, like anytime whenever I'm giving like online presentations like this, I really like it when people interact and chat and tell me stuff and ask me questions, because I think that's more interesting for you watching, because you can take part in this. So do let me know if you have any questions, anything as we go along. If you need anything more explained or just want to drive off in a different direction, see where we go. Let's go with it. In the meantime, we're going to do an introduction to APIs. I'll first with an introduction to myself. My name is Phil Nash. I am a developer evangelist at a company called Twilio. Twilio itself is a communications platform. That is, it's a whole bunch of APIs, which is one of the reasons I like talking about them. A whole bunch of APIs that you can use in applications to do things with communications. So that's things like sending and receiving text messages, making and receiving phone calls, making video chats, all sorts of stuff. If there's a phone number or an email or something involved in it, and you want to develop with it, then Twilio's got an API for that. Doesn't mean I'm a developer angel. No. The shortened version of developer evangelist is devangel, but I don't like to make any claims of being angelic in any way. This collection of alcohol should make that more obvious. Cool. So let's do, if you do want to follow me online or anything, have any further questions after this, please do. I'm Phil Nash anywhere on the internet, or just drop me an email at philnash@twilio.com. I'm happy to help with almost anything, but I'm mostly good at APIs and even better at Twilio stuff. So do get involved, get in touch if you want to after this, and I'll throw the slide up near the end as well. So let's talk a bit about APIs. I don't really know the level that everybody's at, so I apologize if this is too slow or if it's too fast. But again, throw out messages in chat to let me know which way we're going. But as part of this intro to APIs, I want to talk a little bit about what an API is, why we want to use APIs, how they work and how to work with them. And then we're just going to go off and explore a few APIs with some code, with some actual calling APIs and seeing how they work like in real life. I've got a couple of APIs. One of them will be the Twilio API because I know that one quite well, but it's not the simplest one. So we'll start with something else a bit before that. Cool. So first up, what is an API? We probably should start by getting the letters out of it and calling it what it really is, which is an application programming interface. And the best way to explain this is really to single in on that word interface. And I'm going to start with a very old example of a radio here. See, everything we have around us has interfaces, things that we use. And that's very much the case in this old radio. It doesn't look like it actually works, but when it did, you've got things on there for buttons to turn it on and off and play things and play the tape deck that looks pretty old there as well. There's dials for twisting to change the volume. The volume one's broken on this one, it seems. The balance and the tone, there's different functions on there. And the important thing is that even actually, if you've never used a radio or a tape player like this, you probably have an idea of how to actually use it. You press the buttons to make it do things. You twist the dials to change, like I said, the volume or things like that. And so this radio, this music player here has an interface that we know how to use. The thing is, behind those buttons, behind what's going on there, we actually don't need to know how it works. We'll press a button, music comes out the little speakers, and we're happy with that. We don't need to know how it is doing it inside. We do not need to know the implementation details behind these buttons. And you understand the interface here. And this interface can then actually evolve over time. We might get to something like this, which again, is still super old, but it's an interface that we probably still know how to use. It still has buttons. It's got this little slidey wheel now, which is quite intuitive. But again, once you get to know the interface, you still don't need to know what's going on inside the block of the iPod here. You just press buttons and music comes out. Glorious. And this evolves again into more things that we use today. And in this case, we now have software running on a device where we now have software-based interface and buttons that we can still press, and we still know that we'll play music at the end of the day. But we still don't need to know either how that button works or what it does whilst it plays it. And what's interesting here, and so the important thing is that we know this interface and we understand the interface. We don't need to know what's going on behind the scenes. Who's fiddling around with a microphone there in the background? Cool. So just to get the benefit, all we need to know is the interface. And I think what's quite interesting actually is that when it comes to software and like this example of, I think, this is Spotify on the device here. All we need to know is how to use the buttons, but the engineer building the Spotify app here actually had to deal with APIs and interfaces themselves, because the Spotify app does not implement like how to actually turn an MP3 file or whatever it is behind the scenes into music. It's actually just going to hand that file off to the operating system interface to play the music out of the speakers or out of the headphones or whatever. And so there's sort of APIs, interfaces all the way down here, from us just touching the screen to the person building this, to the operating system kind of taking a music file and playing it, to even that interface between the operating system and then the hardware itself to actually make things work. And so there's all layers of abstractions based on these interfaces. And so what is an API? An API is an interface for us as developers to use to interact with something that we don't have to understand what's going on the other side of it. And I think that's really useful. It actually makes our life a lot easier. The fact that things get abstracted over time from hardware, from operating systems up through software and into graphical user interfaces and other interfaces. We don't have to understand the implementation, but we can use it. And so an API is that, but for writing code and writing software. And APIs are everywhere. When one program calls another program, and that's really where we are talking about here in terms of programming, is being able to call another program, call another piece of software from your code. These APIs are everywhere. At the very basic bottom of your language, there's like a string API, for example. If you, this is just JavaScript. I don't know what languages. Do shout out actually in chat, like what languages you are more comfortable with or like using. Personally, I'm probably going to stick with JavaScript for the process of this talk. But I'd love to know what you're actually like working with as well. But in this case, C, Python, JavaScript, nice. I've never done C. It's one thing I've always avoided. So, and probably there's less APIs in C than there are in things like JavaScript. But in this case, like if we take the string hello world and we call to uppercase on it, we don't have to know how the language in this particular case is doing this change, is turning the lowercase letters into uppercase letters. We just get the result, and that's nice. It saves us having to do, annoying maths on the number of bytes. The byte representation of these characters, which I don't know. You might have to do that in C. Not quite sure. Like I say, I don't use it. I don't know if there's an uppercase function in C. Might be, might not. You can tell me. Leo asked, "What's the difference between an SDK and an API?" And that's a good question. So SDKs, I think, are ways to provide APIs to you, but we'll cover a bit more of that distinction in just a little bit. Yeah, we'll get past that because these APIs aren't what I want to talk about really for the duration of this talk. But this is quite useful. And then you think, actually, if you look at more in-depth things like a file system API, this I think is interesting because this file system API, this is the FS library module in Node.js. It doesn't matter if you run this on a Mac, on a Windows PC, on Linux. It doesn't matter what that operating system is using as a file system type. You can run this code, and as long as that path is to a real file, you can read the contents of that file from the file system. And so this is the point where, again, you don't have to care about the implementation. And yeah, I think we're seeing a bit more stuff about C here. Like C is annoying because you have to do everything. And you know, the closer the fewer the number of abstractions you have, the more work you have to do with a language. And so like C, you have to do a lot more work. In terms of JavaScript or in Python, there's a lot of that work done for you, and that's really nice. And so we have in JavaScript here, the file system API allows us to access the file system. We don't have to care about what this is running on. And then, of course, there is third-party code as well, libraries and other things that you include. And again, those libraries provide you an API to use them. And yeah, they're an API in such that you don't have to know how the implementation is done. You just need to know how to use them. And so a library or an SDK, they all kind of mean the same kind of thing in a way. And so, yeah, APIs are abstractions. Yeah, CC has got that nicely. But what I really want to talk about today, which I think is more interesting, is remote APIs. Because if I just got to the end of this and went, APIs are those abstractions you use, and we're done because we can just go about our day, go use our programming languages and be like, okay, cool. Every method I call is an API, basically, and it is. Because it is that definition of how to use something that you don't need to understand the other side of. Then you build your own APIs and you understand both sides of it, I guess. But really what I think is interesting and hopefully useful for you today is talk about remote APIs. And remote APIs, I'm going to go back to a real life example for a moment and an actual remote. This is actually, I've used remote controls like this from Samsung before. They're horrible to use. They're still an interface. They're a bad interface, I think. But they're an interface. The interesting thing here is that no longer are we dealing with the buttons on the device that we're pressing, that we're trying to deal with, the television in this case. We're dealing with buttons on a remote device, and we're effectively we are making a request, which we are then sending to the device, the television in this case, sending it over like an infrared channel in this particular case, and just asking it to do something for us. And then we get that response. We see the response, in this case, on the TV. And so what I like about this is that now we don't even have to, be dealing with the item, the object, the thing we're trying to interact with in person. We have this other mechanism of sending it messages in order to do something. And that is what I like to think of as, like a remote API. It's a way of, a remote API is like a remote, it's a way of making requests to a remote service and then receiving a response. So a remote API becomes not a part of your application, not like those libraries that you can include, not like modules you can include, not like the API of the language itself. A remote API allows you to perform actions that are not handled by your application and that are handled. Not only do you not need to know how they're implemented or how they're run, all you need to know is kind of where they're located, and that's it. And so those are the type of APIs that I want to talk about today, this remote interface to programmability, to storage, to all sorts of power and interesting things you can do. So I want to cover a little bit, I guess, about why to use APIs, remote APIs in this case. So from now on, when I'm talking about APIs, that's the shortcut to remote or third party or web APIs that we're talking about here. Not just those APIs in your programming languages or SDKs. So why remote APIs? Why are we interested in those? Well, like I said, we have access to this remote storage or power or capabilities that our application or our device, if you're building an app on a mobile device, doesn't have or doesn't need to have access to. And so think about, I guess, programs like Shazam, for example. Shazam is actually bought by Apple, I think, but it's the app that you can use to, listen to music, and it'll tell you what is actually playing. I think it's a magical application, but it's a magical application that's using its own API in the background, because there's no way a single application can store enough data, or a single device can store enough data to match against any song in the world. At least just from a little recording of any song in the world. And so being able to use a remote API allows Shazam, or the Shazam application, to use the storage and power of their remote services. Similarly, another one for power, have you ever used the Google Translation app where you get the camera and point that at foreign text, and it then writes the text over the image live on your device? That's, I think, one of the more magical applications, I think, out there, where it just becomes this universal translator for you, and you just point it at things and now you know what they say. Although it's not the best at times, but what it's doing there, that's not using the power of your device. Most devices do not have the capabilities and the raw processing power to both be reading that image and then turning that image into whatever text there is, and then running translation power capabilities on it, and then returning that and rendering it back to your screen. And so that is going off, and it is going to the cloud. Absolutely, Cameron. Sort of. It is going off. It's sending that information over to Google servers in that particular place over their API, and is getting returned. And the information is being returned to render on the device. And so that's the case like for mobile applications, but it's also the case for web applications or any other kind of server-side thing. You might not have the storage, the power, the capabilities. You don't have the research team behind you that someone like Google and their Translate team does. But third-party APIs are made available to you to use so that you can make use of this kind of thing inside your own application. And sometimes APIs, third-party APIs like this, just make things easier. It's work you don't have to do. And I'm a big fan of work you don't have to do, because there's so much to learn, so much to do in programming and coding, that if somebody has done it for you, then you can concentrate on the problem that you're trying to solve. And so there's examples of APIs that make things easier and just do parts of an application that you don't necessarily need to do yourself. So, for example, user authentication. There's companies, well, Firebase is part of Google. Auth0 are a huge player in this market, in which you can create user authentication, and so you don't have to handle users logging into your application. You can pass that off to a third party. And then there's communications. That's Twilio. So we make it easy to send text messages or make phone calls using an API. And that's not just behind the scenes, behind that API, we've not just implemented making those, dealing with the protocols of networks and telecom providers around the world. We've done all the deals with those telecom providers. So even if you were able to write the code to send a text message, make a phone call, you still have to then get deals with telecom providers around the world. So that makes it easier for you right there. Payments, so Stripe or PayPal make it easier to do payments. And that, another one, is another thing you definitely don't want to spend too much time with. Credit card processing has a whole load of restrictions and regulations around it. And if you can allow a third-party API to do that, you can carry on writing your application and leave the payments, leave credit card processing to a third party. And then storage and compute places like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud allow you to actually kind of use computing processes as an API. I think that's quite cool as well. Again, it allows you to hand off from your own application to somewhere else to get things done. I saw a question there from Hayes, stock market data. Are there APIs for that data? There absolutely are. Right, Cece's responded there. I used one recently called FinHub, which is actually quite a nice API to get access to that stock market data. I have a blog post on how to do that in TypeScript, which I can maybe share later if you're interested. I'll go find that. But yeah, so it is very good. Yeah. So my blog post is simply like you can send a text message into a number and it would go look up the stock market thing for it. Finhub.io, that's the one. Thanks, Rani. Cool. So that's so remote APIs they can either save you time or they can add superpowers to your applications without you having to put all the effort in. And that's really useful because you don't have to spend the time building that part of it as well. You can concentrate on your application itself. So let's have a quick look at how APIs work from the sort of theoretical level, I guess, before we dive in to actually writing some code and seeing them in action. One nice thing about this is that APIs mostly rely on standards. And if an API is well implemented, then you should be able to recognize how to use it based on any other experience with APIs. Now, that's a bit of a hope, but hopefully you'll see that. So APIs in the first place are typified by a client-server relationship. So the server is the API we're talking to, and we are a client. You can think of this almost like using a web browser to visit websites. The web browser is the client. The site is served up from a server, and you use a URL to address that server, make a request to it, and receive a response. I had a slide for this. You make a request to the server and you receive a response. And that's actually like the basis of everything we're going to do here today. So that the URL, a uniform resource locator, or sometimes you'll hear URI, which is uniform resource identifier. Identifier the URI is a subset of URLs. URLs are a bit more specific. In fact, a URL has a bunch of stuff about it that you'll see. You'll recognize this from using a browser. So you have the scheme at the front. That's the protocol. For the most part, the web is done over HTTPS these days. Then there's the host, the location of the server. That's the sort of domain part of it, which the browser is going to resolve to an IP address, which is a physical location for the server. Then there's the path, which is a sort of a resource that you're requesting from the server. I'm going to talk a bit more about resources in a minute. And then you see query string parameters. Those are, additional kind of parameters that you can add to this URL to maybe change things. Do APIs always send info via URLs? When talking about remote APIs like this, you mostly will make requests to servers located with a URL. Yes. Trying to think of any time that would be the other way around. There's other occasions where, for example, accessing API similar to how front end connects to back end. Yeah, possibly actually. Right. And indeed, if you are writing a front end that is separate to a back end and kind of communicating with it from the JavaScript or from the client side of things, if you're in a mobile application, then yeah, like you are communicating with your own API there. The backend is providing the API. I was going to say, if you for APIs always sending information via URLs, I'm still going to say yes to that. There's other ways around to it though, and if we get time to talk about this later, and I'm not sure if we do. But there are APIs which will make calls back to your application, and they can do that in a number of ways, but it still is mostly URL based. Yeah. The important thing, I think, to kind of get as a concept is that APIs describe resources and actions. Yeah. And so some of those actions, they're very basic actions in a way. It comes under the CRUD kind of acronym, which is create, read, update, and delete. Those are the 4 kind of actions that you can do to a piece of data. And that's what APIs, right, allow for you to do. Creating something, reading it, reading lists of them, updating an item or a resource, or deleting a resource. And all of this kind of leads into REST. REST is a style of API. Comp 1531, okay. I have no idea what that is. So REST is a style of API. It stands for representational state transfer. And the idea of REST is that you deal with resources using HTTP methods to perform those kind of CRUD actions on a resource. And so resources can be anything, right? It's data, basically. In the case of, let's think about it. In case of that Spotify application that I looked at as an interface earlier, Spotify has an API which you can use yourself. It's free to use, actually. It's a pretty good API. But in there are resources like artists, albums, songs, or tracks, I think they are, in fact, playlists. And those resources, can be linked together. It's a database at the end of the day on the other end of things. But the API then gives you access to perform some of those CRUD actions on those resources. There's not an awful lot of deleting songs available via the Spotify API, but you can certainly kind of create playlists and read lists of songs and search for things. That's just a version of reading, updating your playlists, deleting playlists, mostly the things you can do with your own account available via the API, as well as then reading and listing other stuff. So resources can be anything like that. It's sort of an abstract idea over an object, which can exist in real life, like a song or an artist. And then there's actions. Like I said, create, update, read, and delete. But then they get mapped to actions within HTTP. So HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That's, again, like we talked about a web browser. HTTP is the protocol itself. It is about transferring and hypertext, being basically HTML text documents that are linked together using anchor tags. But we have taken HTTP to use for APIs as well. And HTTP has a bunch of actions which map to those, create, read, update, and delete actions. So get is the action you use to kind of fetch things. You're not going to change anything with a get. You want to fetch data. Post is for creating things for the most part. You might find APIs out there that use post for anything that's not just getting something. But if they're really following the ideas of REST and representational state transfer, you will use post to create a new object, a new resource. Patch or put can be used to update in different ways. So patch allows you to sort of change, or is used to change a resource, a part of a resource. And put is sort of used to replace a resource with the data in this new resource. And then delete, fairly obvious. It's for deleting things. There are more HTTP actions. But these are the kind of 4 or 5 that are important for APIs and considering them right now. And so APIs, as the client, you make requests to an API, and that is made up of the URL. So the URL is that locator for the resource, uniform resource locator. So we're talking about resources, we're locating it. We then use a method to say kind of how we want to perform an action on that resource. So if we just want to get the information about the resource, we use the get method. There can be a body to the request. Get requests do not have bodies, but others do. post and put and patch will. And then there are headers, which give you metadata about, which allow you to add metadata about the request. So that can tell the remote server other things you want to receive about in the response, for example. Then there are responses. And responses are basically made up of three things: a status code to tell you what happened. So you probably, or hopefully you've kind of heard it, like 200 is okay, everything went well. 404, Cameron, there you go, is missing. That's where you have a URL that points to something that's not there. So you receive a 404 response. So 200 or responses that start with a 2 tend to be things went well. Responses starting with a 3, like 301, 302 are like redirects. 307 is a redirect. It's basically not here, somewhere else. That's what 3 statuses mean. Statuses beginning with 4 mean the problem is with the client. So in case of 404, the client asked for something that didn't exist. The 400 response is a bad request, which means that whatever the client did, the request was not correct and the API is not going to deal with it. And then 500 of the 5 responses starting with a 5 are problems on the API side, on the server side. 500 responses just couldn't do it. 504, I think, is timeout, so the server couldn't perform the action in the time. And that's kind of most of what you need to know about those headers. So yeah, I've done a bunch of talking. I'd rather just get in and explore a couple of APIs for now and write some code and show you them working. And show you different ways to work with APIs as well. See, I think this is the important thing here, is that it's not just about writing the code, but about how you actually explore and work with an API. So the first one I'm going to work with is an API that's actually built by a former colleague of mine at Twilio years ago. He was very much into Pokemon and built up a Pokemon API. And what's amazing is that he built it for free in his spare time, and these days it now serves 60 million API calls a month, which is quite amazing, really. I think he's had to get like funding for it and things like that in order to keep it live, because it is intense doing that. There's a lot of contributors to it as well. The whole thing is open source, so you can go and see all the code in the back end. Now, this is a relatively simple API because it is mostly just a get-based API. There's no way to update data about Pokemon with this API. What that means is there's no need to do any authorization with the API. We can just make requests to it. And that's even proved right here on the homepage of the API, that you can make requests to this API right here on the homepage. Let's change from Ditto to Pikachu. We can make a request to go get Pikachu, and that is all the data about it. And we can look at the raw JSON, for example. And so JSON JavaScript object notation is probably the most popular data transfer kind of format for APIs these days. And a JSON object is very much like it's almost like every language that we have out there pretty much has a way to transform JSON into the native kind of object or map or dict. If you're in Python, I think you like dictionaries, arrays in PHP, objects or maps in JavaScript. And turn this into that, and then it's easy to kind of encode the data back as JSON. This has a nice viewer on the JSON itself, but we're not here to just play around with this API on the web page itself. But what I want to say is that the first thing we should do about this is really cool that we can try the API right here, but documentation is super important, and any decent API will be well documented and tell you how to use it. And this is kind of why I went through all that kind of introductory stuff at the start with how we're working with an interface, and then how URLs work, because a good API is going to show you how you're going to call the API, how you're going to format your request in order to receive the response. And so this Pokemon endpoint, which is the same as the one we've seen on the homepage, is a GET request to this URL, pokeapi.co/API/v2/Pokemon, and then the ID or the name of the Pokemon. And so brilliant. Like we know how to make calls to this. And this one, it gives you the documentation here is also giving you an example of a response you'll get. It's then giving you all the data you'll get from that. And you can get such a long way in any kind of development once you kind of recognize the patterns of this by just reading the documentation. And I'm guilty of scrolling through stuff until I try and find the thing I want, but really genuinely reading the important stuff will get you an awfully long way. I can't stress that enough. And yeah, if documentation has little things to help you try, that's even better. But let's go and take this to the command line instead. Where's that? Here we go. Can you read this? That's a good thing. Do let me know if this is too small at all. But yeah, so some tools that you might want to use to play around with APIs. It's good, thanks, Cameron. Some tools you might want to use to play around with APIs include curl. Curl is either available on your machine already, or it is relatively easy to download. And curl allows you to make HTTP requests from the command line. So we can take that URL. We can make a GET request, although that is the default, and we can make a GET request for a Pokemon of our choice. Any ideas what we should make a request for on the command line? Throw something in chat, because every single Pokemon name has now gone out of my head. I'll take the first one, Charmander. Nice. I've got to spell it right first, though. So that is, woohoo, there we go. There is a lot of data about Charmander. It filled up my entire screen. Cool. I might let's see if there's a less important Pokemon. Charmander, pretty a lot of things going on. Shedinja? Is that real? It is real, and still a lot of information about it. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So this API has got very. Here we go. So here's the start. We can see this is the start of our JSON response, and the Pokemon has abilities. And what's really nice about this API is that ability is also a resource within the API. And so this list of abilities that we have here, Wonder Guard, for example, we can then get the URL for that and make a request to that as well. Let's just grab, hello. That is the ability, but I wanted to grab it and go down and clear that up and make a new request to the ability, because that might have less data about it. There we go. So here's the ability of Wonder Curl, or whatever it was. Has effect changes. There's a lot of stuff here. Apparently this one is in German for some reason. Oh, so somebody's done translations of this API as well. Lots of stuff going on here. Yeah, loads of translations. That's very cool. But as you see, we make a curl request. The curl is making that HTTP request, and we get JSON back. That's really cool. That's really useful. Is JSON standard? And does XML or YAML get used? JSON is mostly the standard these days because of its simplicity. You're dealing with the only kind of artifacts within JSON are the other, your curly braces or your square braces to delineate between new object or a list of objects. XML is still around. You won't find too many like new APIs using XML as a data transfer format, although you might find some older ones will provide you either JSON or XML. I don't think the some API, yeah. So in the headers to a request, for example, you can do things like tell the API what you accept. And if I tell this API that I accept text XML, it might tell me that it doesn't do that, or it might just return the JSON. Yeah. YAML, I've never seen an API return YAML. That would be somewhat terrifying. Interestingly enough, I don't know if you know this, but JSON is a subset of YAML. So all JSON is valid YAML, but YAML is white space. White space is important in YAML, is significant in YAML, and that's not great necessarily for, as you can see, like we have cut out the spaces in this so that there's less to transfer across the wire. But so YAML does not get used. JSON is pretty much the standard. XML is used mostly by older APIs. And there are other things which I've not actually spent much time dealing with. I think it's popularized in the Go language as protobufs, which is a more concise version of serializing the data. So you might find that, but it's mostly around things that use Go and for particularly performant operations. But I haven't really dealt with them, so I can't tell you much more. But that's curl. But what I want to curl's not very friendly. It's a command line tool. I always forget how to do things with it. So if you, I know that -x allows you to set that HTTP method. That -h allows you to set headers within a string like that, and you can add more. And you can add data by adding a body. By adding. There's various ways of adding data. It's not very friendly, and so I wanted to suggest a different tool, which is Postman. Postman is a application that you can just download and use on your machine. There is actually a web version of it, I think. There used to be, and now there is again. And Postman's really cool because you can make collections of APIs. And if we'll make a new collection here called PokeAPI, and we can then start adding requests to that. So in this case, we'll just do get Pokemon. And so that API was Pokemon. And let's add in somebody else. Shouted Dratini. I like Dratinis. I like the friendly thing they grow up to be. And we can add this and sort of, oops, get out of here, send that request. And Postman will send the request for us. It's actually going to tell us more about the request itself and format the thing for us. So there's our raw data, but there's a formatted version of it in JSON. And so if the APIs return other things, you can tell it that. We actually go look at the headers that were returned by the API here. So this is the response headers that we got back. We didn't send any headers. Well, we did send 6 headers apparently, but these are the ones that came back. So there's things like content type, application JSON. So we know that the content was returned as JSON. There's a whole bunch of other stuff here. It is very nicely formatted. It's really useful to use. Postman just makes using these things much nicer. And then we can, if I add another request, we can actually list Pokemon as well according to the API. And if we list Pokemon, we do so by not providing a Pokemon name or ID. And this is going to give us a list. So here we've got these results starting at number 1. And going off in the first, I'm not sure how many we've got there, but that's not many of them. But then we can actually, using Postman, start adding things to the URL here. But there's not 1,118 in this. Right, there is a count there. But if you can see this next URL here, we have got an offset and a limit. And so in this case, we've actually returned the first 20, and then the next page is going to start at 21 and get the next 20 after that. And so we can click that and get the next 20, send that, and start at 0. But now you can see we've got our URL parameters, query parameters, and those are available in Postman to now play with. And so if we actually wanted to start at number 200 and just get 5 of them, we've changed those values here, and you can see that they've changed in the URL at the top here. We can send that, and Pokemon number 200 is unknown apparently. and then Wobbuffet, Giraffarig, Pineco, Fortress. Those are our next 5. So Postman's really good for exploring these APIs. Is the limit just to reduce the response time? Yeah. Yes. So if you were to set the limit as all of them, let's start at 0. I wonder, there's a time here actually, so you can see that the request to get 5 of them offset by 200 took 618 milliseconds, and so if we make a request to get all of them, it took 724 milliseconds. Not too many more, but when you're dealing with real life databases, which maybe have millions of rows, you can't feasibly return millions of lines of data back to somebody. The request will take forever. And so, having a limit and will reduce demand on servers, reduce the request time for your own application. And if you need to get all of the data, you should maybe consider other ways of doing it or caching that data yourself. Let's set that back to 100. Cool. So this is, Postman, doing a bunch of stuff. I want to see the hidden headers as well. Okay. So we're sending our URL when we can get request, and we also send a bunch of headers which are metadata about our request. And so our user agent is Postman version 7.28.1. It will accept anything. Star just means accept any kind of response. And also it will be able to decompress any compressed responses too. And we keep alive the connection. So actually behind the scenes, Postman still has a connection to PokeAPI.co and is waiting for us to send another request to a new path. That's everything after the domain. And so it's already got that request. It's already got that connection to the remote server. And so what we've got here now is this little exploration of the PokeAPI. We have our little collection here of being able to get a Pokemon or list them. And you can go and add more to your collection. And this is just a really good way to explore and play around with and see what responses are like in these in an API like this. Cool. I'm going to move on to a bit more of a complicated API now. I'm going to get onto the Twilio API because I think it's great. And as I said, for the PokeAPI and for all APIs, the best place to start is in the documentation. This is the docs for sending a text message with Twilio. And it comes with example code to start with. We can actually choose curl as an example here. And that's going to send a message. Oh, yeah, nice. No, that's going to get information about a message. But we also have examples here in Ruby or Python or JavaScript, which is what I'm happy using. Hitting up the API, the documentation allows us to talk about the APIs here. And then I'm not going to spend too much time reading the docs, but the SMS API then has a message resource. And again, APIs are just about performing actions with resources. And it's not, I do like to bring up the Twilio one, not just because I work there, but because creating a resource isn't just like putting something into a database. Reading a resource is not just putting something, not necessarily just getting something from a database. When we create a message resource using the Twilio API, this will send a text message to a real life device in the world. And that's cool. I think that's cool. I'll also tell you, I can just see in the end of chat there that we're talking about limits there. Twilio does have millions of lines of messages, billions of messages and calls and things that have been created on the platform. And so you can have, when you list items, you can get a maximum of 100 at a time, and the default is 30. And that definitely reduces time on our servers, but also reduces your time waiting for it as well. Reduces the load on servers, sorry, and the time you spend waiting. So when we want to create a message resource, we can go to the API, we can go to the thing here and create a message resource. This is telling us now that we need to make a post request to this URL. So this URL has been around for a ridiculously long time. That's a bit small. Maybe I'll bump it up a bit. This API first came out in 2010 and has not changed much since then. So this is versioned in the URL here. Then accounts, and account SID is your account identifier, and we also have an auth token. So we're going to see a bit of authorization as part of this request. And then we're reaching out to the messages.json endpoint. I believe Twilio's API is old enough that if you change that to messages.xml, you will get the response back in XML. Yeah. And so we can see an example of how to do this in curl. That's just to fetch a message. Let's do create a message. In curl, it has an example here. And so I can actually copy that and take that over to my terminal here. And if I paste that in, that's not going to work because it's missing a bunch of things. So firstly, I actually do have an account SID in my environment in this terminal. So I have an auth token there as well. And then we've got data URL encode, and we need a from number in order to send a message. And I have to own that from number, and I do have one available to me right here. Now let's go find it. I'm inside my account now. And so this is my account SID, that's my account identifier, and the auth token is hidden. I'm going to keep that hidden because otherwise you could use it, and I don't want you to. So I already have a phone number that I can use. It's an Australian number there. I can say the body hi there. I'm going to send it to my number. So that's +1 +61499. If I send that, I get a JSON response to tell me that the message now exists. It has this ID starting SM30B. It was created now. It's in a status of queued. And it has actually arrived at my device. So if I change this to a GET request, hold on. If I change this to GET request, it's get account SID messages and the message ID that we got there. I think that's right. I need to get rid of these lines with data on it, but keeping the lines with the -u there is sets the authorization header. And so it's actually setting a header, but it is doing so using a username and password kind of thing. And if I get that now, right, cool. So that is the message that we sent. The body was hi there, and it has a status that's now on the other side of the screen there. Status is delivered. And so it is delivered. And I've been using this number for other things, but right down at the bottom on screen there is my message hi there that I sent. I can send a slightly more interesting one. Hi there, CSE. Thanks for the workshop. I have broken that somehow. Cool. No, I have managed to not close a quote somehow. Oh, that's it. Yeah, there it is. Please close your quotes, obviously. So that's sending a message there. And then it's going to come through to my phone. There we go. Hey. We can do the same in Postman. So we can make ourselves a new collection. But, we've seen the collections. One thing I think is interesting, if I was to make a new collection here, and this is really useful for those cases where you do have to authorize things, Twilio uses basic auth. And so I can actually add my account SID and my password here, and then that will get sent for all the API requests that we make in this collection, which is really useful. It's a really nice way to handle that. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get to some actual code. I'm going to drop into JavaScript for this, because the nice thing about APIs, for the most part, is that if a service is offering an API, then they try and make it even easier. Because we've just seen that we can use curl to both get information about Pokemon and also send a text message, but things mostly look the same when we did it. But to make things even easier, you want to actually make it look a bit like it's in your own language. And so Twilio and many other companies with APIs and many other APIs themselves, even the Pokemon API, have like helper libraries that you can install. And so I'm just going to grab the Twilio one, which I have installed already, and show you that that makes it just that touch easier to deal with. So we're going to make an API client. And that uses Twilio as a function. And in that, I'm going to send in process.env.accountSid and process.env.auth token. And this is the same if you saw earlier in curl, where I just where I was using curl and used $accountSid and $auth token on the command line. That is an environment variable, which allows me to hide it from you, but makes it available as a string. And so I make my client, and it's now an authenticated client ready to make calls to the API. And so once more, I can now use it to create a message. And so at this point, we actually, the way this helper library works sort of tries to match the way that the API is set up. So we have a client and we have the messages resource, and we're going to call create on it. And that sort of should make things easy to translate from the kind of URL to the way we then use it within code. And so I'm going to create it from, oops, not that. I'm going to go back and grab my phone number. There it is. From my Twilio number to my number. I can see questions, and I'll get to those in just a second. 9915488. And finally set myself a body. Hello world again. Hello worker threads, apparently. I don't know what that's all about. And when that succeeds, I'm just going to log the result. And that should say hello world. There we go. And we can see again the result, the JSON result that came back from my from calling and creating this message. We see in the first place it's status queued, but now it'll be status delivered if we looked it up again. And it has all the information about it, such as the body we sent and the numbers we were sending from and to. What did we see? So I saw a question that said, would this work with iMessage or WhatsApp? So Twilio works with the WhatsApp API. And indeed, when you send messages with the WhatsApp API, it's almost exactly the same as sending a message with the SMS API like this. You just, let's, what you would do is, I mean, there's a bit more setup to it, but the most different part is that you just add WhatsApp to the front of your from number. You have to have a WhatsApp number that you can use with this, and there's a whole process behind that. But if you're sending to WhatsApp and from WhatsApp, it's exactly the same. Once you've gone through that process, it's exactly the same as sending a text message just like this. That won't work right now, but no. So yes, we can do WhatsApp. WhatsApp have their own API. It's just a pain to use on its own, and Twilio kind of make it easier. That's kind of the idea there. There is a sort of iMessage API, sort of. It's called Apple Business Chat, and it is one of those things that seems to have rolled out so slowly that I've forgotten about it. Twilio has like private beta support for iMessage as part of Apple Business Chat, but it's another thing where you have to go through a whole process with Apple in order to set yourself up for that. So yeah, CC said that the Apple one is more closed. So Twilio does support SMS, it supports WhatsApp, actually supports sending via Facebook Messenger as well. And we are working on other over-the-top channels, some coming up. And what I really like about it is that, for the most part, sending messages is the exact same API call. And so we try and abstract away not only SMS, but also WhatsApp, also Facebook Messenger and other stuff. And then Hayes has asked, does Twilio send emails as well? We sort of do. We actually bought a company called SendGrid, who were like the biggest email platform. And not that, so we can send emails via the SendGrid API. It's not currently the same as the Twilio API, but eventually it will be. but I would check out if you need emails sending, then yes. Oh yeah, Susie's got the SendGrid API there. So it is part of Twilio now. It's just their API still lives under, and if you can see that, api.sendgrid.com. But again, if we look at this kind of curl request, we have a curl request. It's a post request. We're doing it to this URL. We add a couple of headers. There's the data that we're sending in. This data is then in JSON format, and you send an email. So it's the same process again. Everything kind of once you recognize a decent like REST HTTP API, you can kind of use any of them. And I think that's what's exciting. Are there long-term plans to integrate it? Yes, but I'm not privy to the ins and outs of how long that will take. I'm excited to get kind of an all-round, hopefully like an all-round messaging API, which allows you to send messages via email, via SMS, via WhatsApp, via whatever. But it is going to take a little while to get to. We'll get there. We'll get there at some point. But in the meantime, if you want to send emails, then SendGrid and go to sendgrid.com is the way. So I've kind of shown, what have I shown? We talked a bit about how the APIs worked and why we'd use them. We then started exploring APIs and going from that, looking at the documentation, always read the documentation first. We can explore APIs with curl on the command line, but if we want to do it in a prettier way, then Postman is really useful for that. And then I looked at, well, one little addition to Postman, which is nice, is that you can set that authorization so that when you're using APIs like Twilio, where you have to have an account, we can set that up right here. And then we had a quick look at helper libraries and using it as part of an application. And there we have like sending text messages or listing messages. I can list them. Yeah, that was the last one I sent, hopefully. There it is. The message I sent, it's now status delivered. All from like a helper library, which is calling the API for us. And so what I really like is the helper libraries provide us a local API with which to then call the remote API and abstract away even doing the HTTP request. That's why they're helpful helper libraries and why they exist. Now we kind of got to, well, I've been talking, I think, for about an hour after we got started, talked about booze to start with. That's kind of all the things I was planning to show right now. We have some options, like we can take some questions if you have any more questions or anything you want to see about this. Or I could go and talk, and I'm not 100% prepared on this, but I think we can get through it if you're still hanging out. We can talk about webhooks, which is kind of where APIs talk back to your application and give you information back. So drop any questions or tell me if you're interested in webhooks and how they might work. And I'm going to have a little drink whilst you think about that. Everyone's gone quiet. When I said have a drink, I obviously meant the water, not over this side. Webhooks sound really cool. Okay, nice. Water, it's good. What's the coolest use of an API I've seen? That's a really good question. There are so many cool uses of APIs. I love it when people take APIs and just mash them up together and provide and produce something that is just wholly new and exciting. What have I seen? I think one of I saw it ages ago. It was at a hackathon where a team, they took the idea of you like not having data service in a foreign country, but you need to get directions to go to somewhere. Like you've arrived at an airport, you need suggestions how to go somewhere. And so they used, they built an Android application, which behind the scenes sent a text message to Twilio with the place they wanted to go to and where they were going from. That then took I think it took Google Maps API, which gave them a bunch of like directions, which was sent back to the device as text messages and then rendered as an app. So the SMS became this like data transfer because that was the only data connection you might have. but you had this nice app experience. I thought it was really cool. But that was one thing. Oh, there's so many things I can think of. I mean, one team has, but I've seen people build an entire web browser that did its data over SMS, which is nuts. I always like music based APIs. I think there's a lot of things you can do with those, and the Spotify API is really really cool these days. It doesn't just allow you to look up like songs and artists and things like that, but it also allows you to kind of search and create playlists based on kind of the attributes of the music itself. And so Spotify now has this whole bunch of data. They bought a company ages ago that had done this data on songs that include like attributes about a song, like its danceability, which is not something you can necessarily get out of kind of anything else. And I think there's so many nice things you could do with that. Like I was just looking at, because I've been looking at APIs recently for this and thinking of what to use. I'm like, I want to build a thing that's going to make me a running playlist every morning if I want to go for a run. And you can do that by like getting the BPM and I don't think danceability is that important for running necessarily, but I think that's a really cool kind of thing you could do. I don't know if probably somebody has done it. So taking APIs and pushing them together is nice. I once built it was a Twilio app that was allowed you to put in all the artists that were playing at a festival, and then it phoned you up and played snippets of songs from the artists, not telling you who they were. Got you to like rank the songs, not rank, but like vote on them, like 1 to 5, and then would give you a suggested set of bands to see at this festival. That was a fun one to do. So yeah. Suggestions for a beginner's API project. Well, yeah, Cece's got a good point. Like making a Pokedex is a really cool use of that Pokemon API. If you don't want to do Pokemon, there's my colleague Paul, who built the Pokemon one, also did a Star Wars API. If that's more your style, a nice, free, and easy one to use as well in very much the same style. It's recently been taken on by somebody else. That's under Star Wars API, SW API.dev, I think. There it is. Yes. So that's quite a good thing to add for kind of fun things. But yeah, I should have come with more ideas for this kind of thing. How does a beginner begin to learn to build an API? Also, that's an interesting question. And so I'm gonna go off and talk a little bit about webhooks for a second, but that's gonna feed back into that in just a sec. So what have I got to do to, let's bring this up. I'm gonna, exit out of my node REPL, and I think we have an old demo project knocking about here. That's opened up over this side so I can, yeah, okay. So building an API, I think what we've seen so far is dealing with an API is mostly about returning, taking in requests and then returning those responses, and dealing with that kind of same set of constraints that we're doing over HTTP, that there are different methods to call that you that should do different things. And so I've got here I've got the bare bones of an Express application. So this is a Node.js app. Express is a web server framework. It's quite minimal. So even if you don't really know Express or JavaScript, you should be able to see what's going on here. So I have this application. What we can do is say that there's a get. If there's a get request to the root, then we can return a response. And let's make a really simple response just to start with that says hello world. And if we start this server, node app, it's going to run on localhost 3000, and it says hello world. Cool. So we've, this is the same as building a website, but what we've done here is just returned a plain text response to any request to the root path on this application, to any GET request. So this means, like, if we go to our terminal here and we try and make a curl request post to localhost on port 3000, that's an error. You can't post to that. You can only make a GET request to it. And so that's working all right. Well, cool. So if you want to create ourselves an endpoint, let's do a GET again, because I don't have anywhere to put the data right now. But if I wanted to make an endpoint myself, to say Pokemon, and then let's get a name out of it. This is, like I said, I didn't necessarily prepare to do this, but we'll see how far we get with this. In Express, if you use a colon in a path like this, it becomes a parameter that you can pass in. And so in this case, we'll get the name of the Pokemon we're looking for. This is just a made up API. We can get that from the request parameters.name. And then we'll make up a JavaScript object to return as JSON eventually. So we'll make our response object. And we'll say it has the name that we asked for. And then I'll just say how many evolutions it has. I don't know. I'm just kind of making up data right now. And then I can res. So in this case, I want to say that I'm going to send JSON response back. And so I can set headers on this. And so we talked a bit about request headers and response headers. And response headers allow us to tell the client, this is us building the server, this is building the API right now. We're telling the client, this is the format of our response, our content type in this case. I'm going to set the content type to application JSON. This is sort of known as a MIME type, and you can find them for anything. So application JSON is JSON. If you wanted to return XML, you can return application XML. You can also return text XML, but they're basically the same thing. So we're saying that this response is going to be JSON, and then we want to send the response, and we'll send it as a string, but because we're telling the requester that it's also JSON, then that means the browser that requests it, or the API client that requests it, can then decode that and say, hey, cool, I have this JSON object. And so if I restart that application and I'll go get, let's see, we've got to do a get to, also, let's see if I've done this right. Cannot get Bulbasaur, cool. Maybe I've got that wrong somewhere. So let's do, let's change that just to query for now. Oops. Query for now. And now I'm going to, oh, it's because I was doing /get. What am I doing? It wasn't /get, /Pokemon, /Bulbasaur. And I broke the JSON. Oops. So what did I send back? Object.object. There we go. Okay. So under the hood, Express was handling turning it into a string for me. And because I turned it into a string myself, it then also tried to turn it into a string, and that became object. So we're sending this response object back, saying it's JSON, and then the browser, because it has this kind of JSON renderer in it, says, oh, this is JSON. I can make this look pretty, although really it just looks like this. And oops. And I can change the name of the Pokemon here, and it's going to bring back a different one. Ditto does not have 3 evolutions. This is just me making up an API right now. This is the kind of thing I'd start with when you're trying to learn to build your own API, is just to kind of experiment with some data or some stuff you want to, and then make these choices about how you construct your response, how you set those headers, how you send the response and the data back inside that response. Now I wanted to talk about webhooks because some API services use webhooks to tell you that something has happened in the API, and it sort of treats your application like an API itself. And so I'm going to create a post request this time to messages, a messages endpoint that you can make a post request to. And this time, one thing I need to do is this request is going to come in from Twilio, and it's going to come to my endpoint here, and it's going to tell me about an incoming message. That's what's happening here. So if I get my phone back up on screen, and when I send a message to my Twilio number from this device, Twilio is going to turn that into a webhook, into an HTTP request to my server, to this application we're building right now. And it's going to include all the data about the message in the body of the request. And so one thing I need to do is make sure I can parse the body of that request, because the data is sent as, in this case, form encoded, URL encoded, form encoded data. Form encoded data is the same kind of format that a browser will submit data from a form on a web page to a server. And we can do that in Express using this URL encoded middleware. So this is going to do that parsing for me. And so that means I'll get the data out of the request. And so I can just log here, rec.body.body with a capital B, because that is what the data coming from Twilio is going to say. And I can also respond to it. And so we talked about, briefly mentioned XML earlier, but Twilio actually does use XML when we're dealing with webhooks like this, because we use XML to describe what Twilio should do with this message. And in this case, I'm going to make a response. And it actually requires a response tag around it. And then we're going to do a message just to say, thanks for sending me a message. So right, we've got that response. And again, I'm going to set a header to set the content type. In this case, the content type is going to be text XML, because Twilio wants XML back. And if it doesn't get it, it does weird things with it sometimes. And then we're going to send that response. It's already a string, so it's just going to send off. So if I'm going to restart that application, I should be able to say in my terminal, now make a curl request to localhost 3000/messages. That's the post endpoint that we just made. And I'm also going to send it data. I always forget this, which is going to be body equals hello. And right, okay, so I received my XML response saying, thanks for sending me a message. In my application, just right at the bottom of the screen there, you can see that we logged out hello. That was the body of the message that I supposedly sent. But that's not exciting, just doing it from curl. Instead, we want to do it from actually connect it up to Twilio and show you this webhook in action. And so what I'm going to do is open a second little terminal window here and use a tool called ngrok. And so what ngrok does is creates a URL that really exists that you can hit from the web, and then forwards it on to my local machine. So now the URL https philnash.ngrok.io now directs you to that localhost 3000. And that means I can take that URL, go to my phone number inside my Twilio account, wherever it's gone to here. Oh, I've already set it to this. Twilio is using this number for this kind of thing already. So I'm going to set that to philnash.ngrok.io/messages and save the number. And now this time, if I get that up on screen, I should be able to show the phone. If I say here, if I send in, I'm going to send in emoji. That's more fun. And we've been talking about cocktails, and I have a cocktail emoji right there. Although honestly, my favorite emoji is the 2 beers emoji, because I love that somebody was like, we have a single beer emoji. What we need is 2 beers. Here we go. Right, cool. So I got the message back saying, thanks for sending me a message. And we can see right at the bottom of the screen that the cocktail emoji was in fact done there. Never beer alone, exactly. I think what's fun about this is actually you could send messages into this number as well if you wanted now. If you sent a message to that number right now, it's going to show up at the bottom of my screen. You'll get a response back saying, thanks for sending me a message. Give it a go if you fancy. Otherwise, that is kind of how a webhook works. It comes from that external service. You need to create an endpoint on your application that either receives the correct kind of request, either an incoming a post request or a get request or whatever you need there. Send me your favorite emoji. There we go, 2 beers emoji. It's the best one. And then just you need to be able to get the data, whatever data you want. You can reach into a database. You can look it up somewhere else. You need to format that data the way that you want to. In terms of webhooks, you need to format the data in the way that the webhook requester wants it. So in this case, we want to send back this XML. But if you're making your own API, it's basically the same thing. You can choose to send back XML. You can choose to send back JSON if it's your own response. Or you can choose to kind of take the incoming request header that says, I'd like this request. I'd like this response in JSON and return JSON to that. Or I'd like this response in XML and return XML to that. Kind of building your own API allows you to make those choices, give the flexibility that whatever flexibility you want to the clients that will be calling your API. We got a, and yeah, like at the end of the day, like a whole bunch of like different frameworks, different web frameworks are going to allow you to handle this differently. And so it depends on the ecosystem you want to work within. Like I said, like this is relatively, I think, straightforward in JavaScript because it just kind of, the framework itself gets out of the way. You just have this app.get or this app.post, the path. Somebody's sending JSON in. I like it. Did you take time to type out JSON on your phone? I like it. What was I saying? So yeah, the Express framework here allows you to make those GET requests or post, make endpoints for GET requests or post requests. There's the path that you get. You can, as I said, you can have kind of parameters in the path. Then we talked earlier about how a request is made up of a body and headers, as well as the URL and the method. So that request is then this rec object I've got coming into the function here, and we can get those parameters out. You can do whatever you want with the data in there and then send it back. You set your headers, set your response, and send it back off. Like I said, so Express and Node makes it nice and easy like this. If you're working with Python, you probably want to look into something like, and I noticed like a bunch of people are just like Python. And I think that's really interesting, actually, mainly because the Twilio API itself, the first thing you hit when you send a request to the Twilio API, that's going to be Python. It used to be, and it may still be, using an open source project called, oh no, I've lost it now. It's something like RESTful Flask or something like that. So Flask is another kind of framework, a bit like Express. It's quite simple. It gets out of the way. And then that Flask RESTful, I think that's maybe what it's called, allows you to actually more easily deal with kind of building a RESTful API like this. I also like working with Ruby, and Rails is a much bigger framework for this kind of thing. and allows you to do a bunch of things. Has a kind of API version of it. If you're still in Python world, then Django will have its own way of dealing with this. But what I think, hopefully, if you're looking to learn to build your own API, then hopefully this has given you a whole bunch of the kind of the vocabulary and the things to look up and the things to look into as you go ahead and kind of research this more. Because at the end, at its very simplest, APIs are just like being able to respond to HTTP requests to endpoints. But yeah, you want to look into how you're going to build RESTful APIs around that, and find the tools that are going to help you to do that. Because this is not particularly RESTful now, but I'll start that again. You'll be able to find the tools, and you have the vocabulary to look up the tools that are going to help you do this, and the things to search for other more in-depth tutorials on this that I haven't had sort of the time to build, present to you today. So we've done, like I said, I wasn't expecting to do the other side of the API necessarily, but we got there. We sort of got there. Is there any tutorial I recommend in particular? That's a really good question. For working with APIs, there is a tutorial. There's a whole video series by a colleague of mine, Craig Dennis, on the Free Code Camp YouTube. And he goes into a lot more depth, and then he does a similar kind of explanation of APIs in the first place. I used some of his metaphors, but then he does a couple of projects with it that you can build along that I think is really good. Let me find a link to that. 1 second. I'll find a link to that YouTube tutorial. I'm not sure about, oh, there it is. It's APIs for beginners. I'm not sure about tutorials for building APIs yet, but I can look into that. Also, Webhooks course. Oh, that's a new one by Craig, isn't it? I have not read that one. I've not watched that one myself yet, but that's that one's probably good actually for webhooks and learning how the webhooks. Sorry, video started playing in the background there. It's not. APIs for beginners is the one I suggested. Yeah, Ultimate Webhook course for beginners, also really good. Yeah, and that's going to give you some of those ideas of how to build an API just from the perspective of a webhook system, where you kind of have to build the API to work with the incoming request that you're going to get. So yeah, I would recommend that. I believe that one is. It is also Craig. So yeah, he's a superb teacher, and it is really cool. How am I doing buttery screen transitions? What? Am I doing screen transitions? I'm just not quite sure what you mean. Oh, like putting my phone on. Ah, that's a good question. My phone is coming through an app called Reflector, which is pretty useful for doing this kind of thing. If you have a Mac, it's a Mac app. But if it costs, if you want a free version, if you have a Mac, then QuickTime. If you plug your phone in, you can actually just put it on the screen, and that's quite nice. And buttery is nice. Okay, I always think of like buttery as in smooth, as in I was transitioning between things rather than. I'm glad it's nice. So Reflect is really useful, or QuickTime is good and free and already on your Mac. On a PC, I don't know what I would use. It depends on what you have there. But that's what I have there. Rani is saying, how would you deploy an API you built? That's a great question. There are so many ways to deploy things in the world. And they go from relatively simple to very, very complex. And that reflects the application that you may have built. So, for example, I have no idea how people build and deploy like Twilio, the Twilio API itself. There's such a lot of stuff going on there. There's enormous amounts of complexity under the hood there. Meanwhile, my applications look a bit like this, and there's absolutely no complexity. It's right there in front of you. Can you read all the code? And when you're building something like this, I personally really like Heroku for deploying stuff, mainly because it is really quite straightforward. I think Heroku is really useful. I might actually have it installed here, do I? It comes with a command line tool. Yeah, there it is. And I could deploy this right now on Heroku, and it wouldn't take me that much time. I need to change a couple of things. So I would have to change, it gives you a port to run the application on in the environment. And you need to tell it how to run your application. Node app.js. I think I'm going to stop the application now. So if you send a text in right now, it's to that number, it won't work. It'll just not respond to you because I've stopped the underlying application. But I think if I do Heroku apps create, it will create an app for me, and then it can't be as simple as writing deploy. No, that's not a thing. Did I mean destroy? I did not. It's actually Git based, I think. So I should, 1 second. I can't, yeah, don't want to destroy it. Let me just add a git ignore file just to, so I don't try and send all my node modules folder up. That's more like it. Can we deploy? Good question. Git push Heroku. Okay, so I created a Heroku app. I did Heroku apps create. It's really simple. It's just as long as you know what you've actually done. I have a bunch of Heroku apps apparently. Create, destroy, and favorite info, join, leave, lock, open. Not what I meant. Okay. Let me try that once more. Creating a new one, and now I have. So now I have a URL, but it just doesn't do anything. Hey. Now I have a Git. Now I can push to Heroku main. That's just found out I've got a node application. It is installing my dependencies, which shouldn't take too long. And yeah, it's got a whole bunch of stuff in there. Build succeeded. So what I'm hoping is at the end of this process here, I actually get a URL, and when I hit it, it's going to be the root URL. It's going to say hello world to me. Say hello world. Go on. It's thinking about it. There it is. Ha. And so that means it also has my completely fake Pokemon API behind it. There's my JavaScript, and it means I can actually I could now point my phone number at that Heroku URL. Let's find out. There we go. / messages, not the Pokemon Pikachu part. Let's post that, save that. And so we can see that my application I wrote earlier was not running, is not running, but we are running on Heroku now. So I can send another emoji, and I should get that thanks for sending me a message, but this time it did not come through to my local app, it's gone to my Heroku one. That's why I like Heroku. I forgot and reworked out how to deploy an app within like 3 minutes, within 5 minutes there. So I think it's really good. There are, I think like, so I can see CC saying like, yeah, you could use a cloud service. I guess you could experiment with a dedicated server. So I like cloud services, and I particularly like Heroku because, and Firebase is a good example of this as well, actually, because there are services within AWS and Azure that can kind of manage your code for you. This means it depends on what you want to experiment and play with. A lot of the time, I only care about building the application that works. A lot of people like to work on the infrastructure and making sure that an application is going to, perform well, and they can optimize that as best they can. With something like Heroku, you can't do a lot of optimizations. You leave it up to the platform to deal with, and that's the same with like Firebase. With AWS, you can get yourself an EC2 server, which is just a virtual machine in the cloud, and you have to like handle a whole bunch of other stuff, but you have all that control over it. And so there's a lot of, I for example, I have my own website. It's a static website, but I could put that onto something like GitHub Pages or Netlify, really useful for hosting static stuff. But I actually have it hosted on a DigitalOcean droplet. So it's a really small virtual server. DigitalOcean are really useful, really good. But I have it hosted on there because then I get to play with, tweak, and optimize my web server settings. And it's just a source of interest for me, basically how to use Nginx as a web server to host and serve my content. If I wanted to make it easier on myself, I could go to Netlify, I think. So there's so many ways to do it. If the thing you're working on is like building your first API and getting that hosted somewhere, then I would probably choose like Heroku or Firebase or something like that. They're known as like a platform as a service because they do a lot of that other stuff for you. If you want to go dive deeper into it, then go check out AWS, go check out Azure, go check out Google Cloud Platform, GCP, and see that kind of stuff. And you can absolutely, right, and see suggesting like experiment with a Raspberry Pi, sure, like why not? I definitely like putting something in the cloud so I don't have to worry about running a server in my own network that then takes incoming requests. I like to experiment and have those requests coming in using ngrok. Like I said, really useful tool. You can see the requests that were being made to my webhook endpoint when we were sending messages in earlier. Really useful. And then I like to get it up into the cloud so I don't have to worry about hosting another server. And it takes that kind of putting it online part a little bit, makes that a little bit easier. I like Heroku. I'm sticking with that. There was a question, what theme is my VS Code? I think it's Night Owl right now. Night Owl, yes. Yeah, Night Owl. Go check that out. It's really cool. And he's asking, are there any super useful APIs that I've discovered recently that people might not know about? There's loads of interesting things. And as the API landscape just kind of continues getting bigger and bigger as people invent more and more stuff. So there's a really interesting one I've worked with a little bit recently called Typing DNA. And Typing DNA allows you to kind of fingerprint your users via their typing style. And this is kind of useful sort of in a security way, because if a user is typing in their email and their password, then you can see if that typing style actually matches the previous times they typed in their email and their password, which I think is very interesting. But it also allows you to do, maybe this is more of a sore spot, but like kind of remote proctoring for exams to ensure that the person who said they turned up for the exam was the one typing out the exam or typing out their answers. But like there's a whole bunch of interesting use cases for like typing DNA. I think that's really fascinating. Like I said, we mentioned it earlier. I think FinHub is a really good financial services API because it's easy to use and doesn't take a lot of hassle to sign up for and use. And like I said, I can find that. I reckon I can find that blog post I wrote. 1 second. That was using it. Yeah, there it is. I'll drop that link into the chat. What else have we seen recently? I mean, I think fascinating. And a lot of the time I work with messaging stuff, as you can imagine, with with the text message API. But I think there's a lot of interest in building kind of automated assistants or bots, and those you can then use as an API or plug in your kind of communication platform. And so, like experimenting and playing around with Google's Dialogflow, or I mean, Twilio has one called Autopilot, which I've used. Dialogflow is probably more powerful ultimately, but then AWS has one. Azure has a service like this. I think they're interesting things to build with, and then either use as part of your API or make requests to in order to kind of parse that natural language and deal with it. I think that's an interesting one. God, there's so much stuff. You really, I mean. This is the thing I meant to find before I got on. There's an amazing list of free APIs for developers. That's it, public APIs. That just has everything in it. And these are, I mean, it goes from the ridiculous, like the cat and dog facts APIs, and all the way through to books, businesses, spreadsheets, all that kind of stuff. So check out that list. I think that's full of stuff that you can use and get involved in and just play around with. Yes, that is what I meant to point people to in the first place. This public APIs list is really good, and it's open source, like people can add more APIs as they come. I did see Leo asked, what's the difference between a SDK and API? That's a good question. So SDK, and the way we've been talking about it, most of the time I've said API for the last kind of hour and a half has meant a remote API, so using HTTP to access it. However, as I kind of covered at the start, an API is just that interface between programs, and so an SDK is a bundle of software that does some stuff and provides an API so that you can use it in your application. And so an SDK has an API, but an API doesn't necessarily have an SDK. So the PokeAPI, the Twilio API that we kind of dealt with there, when we were just making raw HTTP requests to it using curl or Postman, we weren't using an SDK, but we were calling on an API. However, at the end, when I made requests using the node, using the JavaScript helper library, that helper library is sort of technically an SDK. It's a bunch of, it's a bundle of software, it's a bundle of code that allows you to do some stuff, and it provides an interface which you can then use to call the API. So not super, but maybe that's not super clear. Yeah, I think that's a good example. SDK is a bundle of software, it's a bundle of code. And an API is that interface that you are going to use from your application to talk to that code, and then a remote API has this remote HTTP interface which we then use to talk to and send requests to remotely. That makes sense. Okay, good. Felt like I was going around in circles a little bit in my own head there, but cool. So SDK will have an API that you use to talk to the SDK. But an API doesn't necessarily have an SDK, but most do. Yeah. The list is amazing. Yes, it really is. You spend hours just filtering through that and having fun with it, or finding really serious APIs in there as well. But unrelated, Randy, how did I end up working at Twilio? That's a good question, actually. So my role is at Twilio is developer evangelist. And so I spend quite a bit of time kind of giving talks or writing content and building example apps and all this kind of stuff. And just to kind of help people understand like APIs or the Twilio API, or I'm genuinely happy to help with anything development that I can. I don't know everything, obviously, but if I can help out, I will try. And it's a really fun role. So I got into that because I was very lucky. So I was living in London at the time, and this is about 7 years ago. I'm coming up to almost 7 years at Twilio. It's like 8 years ago, the company I was working at started to say, hey, we think we think the developers should maybe try and share more stuff, write more blog posts, get out and talk at conferences. I think they were trying to use it as a way to kind of build up the company I was at, in order to make hiring easier, make it an attractive place to work, which I think worked for a bit. But basically, they sort of encouraged a few of us developers to go into try public speaking at meetups and conferences and things like that. And that led to me giving talks at conferences in front of other people that worked for Twilio at the time. Not that I knew it at the time either, which was quite weird. I kind of found a bunch of this stuff out later. And so I did that. At the same time, I was writing blog posts. And I always I recommend, if you can, to kind of write down your experiences with things, how you've built stuff. It's great as a reminder to yourself. But then if you share it, it becomes a way to teach it to other people, and it solidifies it more in your own mind as well. And so I really like sharing content, however you do it, writing, speaking about it, will both mean that you've learned it better, and you've maybe taught somebody else, and you get a record of what you did. And so I've been doing that. And then I was going to hackathons and building like fun projects. And I came second in a hackathon, when I was using the Twilio API. And eventually they reached out to me and said, hey, we do this thing where we go to hackathons and conferences and meetups and write content. And we think you'd be quite good at it. So at that point, I'd used Twilio. So I was like, oh, yeah, it's a great API. I'd love to do that. I'd love to help out with it. What was the project I built? So the hackathon one was, we combined, what do we do? We combined like sending a message. It was in order to buy things. It was basically to kind of add PayPal capabilities. The hackathon was called Battle Hack. It was run by PayPal. So you had to build your app with a PayPal API as well. And we combined Twilio and it must have been SendGrid for emails back when they were two different companies, and PayPal and the Bitly link shortening API in order to make it easy to text a number to say, I'd like to buy a thing, or you get a QR code, which opened your app to text to say, I'd like to buy things, that sent back a link to a form which you filled in, paid via the PayPal API, and then received a digital good. And it was all that kind of combination of APIs that got me second place, not first place. First place would have been a trip to Silicon Valley, which would have been nice. But I got a 7-inch Google Nexus tablet, I think, instead. It was nice. It's cool. It was a bit foreshadowing the future, but it was great because I was there working on this like hack with a bunch of other people, and there's a Twilio developer evangelist there who was really friendly and nice to work with and helped out, and then I got to become that myself and did the same thing, which was really cool. And what's the best thing about working at Twilio? Rebecca's asking. Look, Twilio is a great place because I think and it comes from the top, it comes from the CEO, it comes from the leadership, that it cares about, Twilio cares about the world, it cares about everything in that. So it cares about the people working there. I've been working here for nearly 7 years because it looks after me and allows me to do the best work that I can do. But I talk about that in terms of the company like caring as well, because we don't just make a communications platform that anybody can use to do anything with. We have acceptable use policies and all sorts of things that try and like we refuse to work with any company, any organization that has been listed as a hate organization, that kind of thing. So there's that kind of social good part of it. We have a charity wing which gives out donations to company to nonprofits and other organizations who use Twilio to kind of help in charitable efforts and things like that. I think on that side, like we recently, like Twilio made a $10 million US dollar donation to COVAX, which is the global kind of World Health Organization fund for getting vaccinations to emerging economies. It's all sorts of things like that is amazing. And then, as Cece just pointed out, we also try and have a bit of fun with it. And yeah, like Twilio Quest is one way we thought would make like teaching how to code and how to use Twilio a bit more fun. I actually have the game. It's a game to do this. I have the game downloaded. Here we go. I can still launch it. Yeah. So we built an entire game with which you can learn stuff. We just released an update to this that allows you to build your own levels to it as well. So I need to work out my own levels here. But so yeah, the best thing about Twilio is it's a I don't know what the best thing is. I'm just going to keep banging on about it. I'm really happy. It's a company that allows us to do our best work and cares. And I hope there are more companies like that, because I have no desire to stop working here. We make a great product, and we also make a game where you can run around and complete missions with a little robot helper called Cedric. So being happy is good. Yeah, I honestly, like, as you kind of go into, you might hear things about the tech industry and how it's, it has some troubles and with a lot many places, many big companies, many companies in general are working on improving that. But I feel like Twilio has always been ahead of the curve there. So when you kind of go out and try and find places to work and things like that, look for those companies that care and are going to make your experience as part of that company good. Make sure they care, not just about care about the world, but also care about their people. You heard crunch time is a thing. What do you mean by crunch time? We're like 2 minutes to the end of this, but what exactly do you mean by crunch time? Oh, do you mean like rushing to deadlines? Right. Yeah. So that can certainly happen. I mean, so before Twilio, I used to work in an agency, and we used to build applications that would support like TV shows, mainly kind of like social applications around TV shows, which was really cool. Except we had a deadline because the TV show was going to broadcast at a certain time, and so we used to end up, working a little bit hard towards the end. We actually got better at it, though. Sometimes, in my first, I spent 6 years there, and in the first year we absolutely spent like the weekend before a launch working because we weren't ready. But as it got to like my fourth, fifth, sixth year there, we stopped doing that because we got better at estimating and getting things right. So crunch time can be a thing. I think that's more of a thing in actual game development as well. I think I hear that like game developers do get really, really crunched. But the problem with that kind of stuff, again, is because they have a launch date. We at Twilio these days, we have a major conference once a year called Signal. It's in October, and that tends to include releases of projects, of new products and things like that. And if there's ever a crunch time at Twilio, it tends to be around there. But again, the better you get at estimating the work you have to do and the things that are ahead, the less that happens. And so I don't know how much that happens at Twilio. I don't know how much happens in anywhere really, but it's definitely a thing. It depends on your deadlines, and it depends on how good you are at estimating. Cameron's asking, was the same person that made the Pokemon API made Twilio Quest? It was not, no. So the person who made the Pokemon API is Paul Hallett. He worked as a developer evangelist for just under a year. It turned out it wasn't quite the right thing for him, and he's gone on to do some fantastic kind of development in various startups around London. Actually, he's done really well there. And so whilst he was doing fun things like the Pokemon API, He was not around when we invented Twilio Quest the game. This is built by a small team now within Twilio. Yeah, so we actually have a small team working on this. We're trying to get it into various places of education around the world. So we're working on like universities in the US for teaching people how to code and things like that with it. And it's got a good. It basically was born out of the fact that we wanted to make in-person workshops a bit more fun by making it a game, and then it's had a lot more uses for that since. But yeah, there's a whole teamwork on it, and who are delighted that they started as developers with APIs and things like that, and ended up in game development. But this entire app is actually it's a JavaScript application as well. It's actually built in JavaScript and React, and a game library called Phaser. So it's sort of like a cross between web development and game development that has made our team very happy. But yes, I think I think Rani, maybe you meant to send that to just the other people, but that's fine. We have reached 1 o'clock, and I just keep talking, and I will just keep talking. Sorry, you probably have other things to go and do and stuff like that. So, where my time? The only thing I've got to do next is lunch. So if you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them. But if we do want to wrap it up, then I am happy for that as well.
Yeah, I think thank you so much for teaching us everything about APIs. It was really interesting, like looking at how you could send stuff to your phone and then send it back to your computer for VS Code.
That's the magic of APIs, just being able to, they're doing all the difficult things in the background, and all we have to do is send a request to say, hey, just send this message, or get this detail about this Pokemon, or find out what the stock prices are right now. It's the magic of APIs, and that's why I love working with them.
Yeah. So like, just wanted to ask everyone else if you had any last burning questions to ask Phil.
And if you think of one, if you don't think of one right now, but you do, like I said, drop me an email. My email's on the slide on screen right now. philnash@twilio.com. Happy to kind of answer or help out at any time.
Yes, thanks everyone for attending, especially Phil, but also for the students. Hopefully you got something out of understanding APIs, because the skills learned here is really applicable and helpful for your own coding projects. And this is 100% not a plug for the CSC Soft Personal Projects competition that is happening right now. So that's just an annual competition for students showcasing their creative coding skills. And also we have our upcoming CSC Soft annual flagship hackathon, which Twilio is also coincidentally also involved in. And I believe you're also involved in like the opening ceremony at some point.
I think it all maybe depends on how this all comes together in the end. But yes, I'll be there somehow trying to help out. Yeah. So yeah, looking forward to that actually. I'm looking forward to seeing what you'll create.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So this is just like yeah, our upcoming hackathon that's happening on the 17th to 18th. It's like in a team of 3 to 5 members where you like develop a product over 24 hours. And yeah. Yeah, so really excited and looking forward to that. Also, there's also this wait, sorry. There's this link here. Yeah, that you can sign up to. Yeah, Rani sent it to. Basically what it does is that it gives a promo code for a $30 Twilio voucher. Yeah.
Hold on, I can tell you actually, well, sign up to that as well, but yeah. What did I say? We can't share this kind of thing just on social media or something, but if you use the promo code intro to APIs, then yeah, you get $30 of free Twilio credit to go play around with. Now you can sign up to Twilio for free anyway, but there are some restrictions on a free account. So use the promo code, you get a unlocked account, and you can play around with it as much as you like.
Yeah, so if there are no more questions, that will end our Intro to API workshop with Twilio. Thank you everyone for coming again, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day and looking forward to their lunch.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.